everyone. This is Valerie Cartonio with Season 2, Episode 2 of the Prison Pod. In just a moment, we have a guest joining us. I want to remind you that this show is for you, and I want to hear your thoughts, ideas, and comments about the show. You can write me at any time at the Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473. So let's get on with the show. We have Joseph Kajy joining us today, and I'm going to start right off with asking you to introduce yourself and how you can relate to our listening audience across the country that are experiencing incarceration at this moment.
Absolutely. Number one, thank you for the platform, for just being here. I love the message. For a little bit about who I am, I'm here located in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm currently 31 years old. I've spent a total of 5 years of prison time in the state of Florida, 2 separate prison sentences. And the experiences for me, a lot of the life lessons, what's amazing that I have learned today that I'm passing on to my children, I'm passing on to people I speak with, are a lot of the things that I actually learned as I was incarcerated in prison. When you're incarcerated, what happens is you put yourself in an environment. And a lot of times we hear this a lot in prison. It's you either do the time or you allow the time to do you. And that message for me was so big because what that taught me while I was incarcerated was, okay, I'm here. This is my situation. I'm in prison. There's nothing I can change about it. But I could either allow this to be a victim of my story, allow this to be the thing that holds me back, allow me to actually start allowing the prison environment to change who I am for the negative or for the positive. The first time I went to prison at the age of 18, I allowed myself to get involved with, as we used to call it in prison, the riffraff. I got involved with the selling and the dealing and the just kind of maneuvering of the system. And here I am in prison doing the same things I was doing when I was out. And of course, nothing changed when I came home. Of course, when you come home and you get out of prison, your first thought is, I'm never coming back, because you remember what it was like. You don't want to go back. The problem is I didn't change any habits. I didn't learn anything. I didn't allow myself to develop while I was there. So I look back at that first prison sentence when I was 18. I got out when I was almost 21 years old. And the reality is, for those 2 years, nothing changed. I just got out a little bit older. I had the same mindset. I developed some more criminal activity skills, but I didn't learn about how to put myself around positive people. I used to think in prison there was no positive people, but the truth is if you look for them, they're there. And if you choose to look for the positivity and reading books and developing yourself to prepare when you come home, I believe when you come home, it's almost like preparing for battle. When you come home, you're ready. But if you're not prepared for battle while you're in there and you're just getting by, you're just letting the time pass. When you come home and nothing changed, insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. And that's why I ended up going to prison the second time.
So, and did you do a longer time that time?
That time I ended up doing 3 years. So I got 3 years. The second time I went in when I was about 23 years old. They also gave me 2 years probation for that time as well.
So, what was your aha moment? What changed you where you decided, I'm done with this?
Yeah, what's amazing is as I was doing the same things, what happens when you're not reflecting on the decisions you're making, you don't ever realize that if I keep making these decisions, I'm going to end up back here. For me, I'm a go-getter, right? I'm a business owner today. I think I can conquer everything. So sometimes I got so stuck with being in the motions while I was in prison that I wasn't realizing that, man, if I don't make a change, this is going to be my life, in and out of prison, or end up dead because of my drug addiction. My aha moment is I was, as they call it in prison, the box. I was in the 10 by 10 confinement cell. I got 4 months left of my sentence. In prison, I'm getting in a lot of trouble. I'm carrying around contraband. I'm doing things I shouldn't be doing. So obviously you get in trouble in prison. They send you to what they call the box, which is confinement. A lot of listeners will probably understand this. And I'm sitting there, and there's an individual in there, and this guy's probably about 60 to 70 years old. And he's been to prison 13 times. And he looks at me and he says, "You're going to be just like me." And for a moment, I'm just looking at him thinking, realizing like, wow, I'm going to be like this guy. Here I am in prison doing the same things. I can't even stay out of trouble in here. And for the first time, I honestly was afraid. I was thinking, if I don't make a change, if Joseph keeps doing the same things, I'm going to end up back here. What that allowed me to do was throw my pride and ego aside, especially in prison when you're around, for the men who are listening, for us men, we're very prideful. I mean, women are probably the same way. I can't relate to pride for being a woman, but I know for us men, we got a lot of pride, and especially in prison, pride is very important. You gotta stand your ground. You got to be able to hold your own. There's all these prison codes you live by that are feeding into our pride, which that pride leads us to a place to say, I'll figure this all out. I got this. But for me, I was humbled in that moment to say, I don't know if I got this. I don't know that if I can actually start. I don't know where to start. I really didn't have any idea where to start making a change. What's amazing about that is it was a great point to be at. To say I don't know allowed me to start searching, allowed me to start saying, I see guys who have these self-help books. I wonder what these books talk about. I would read books about Harry Potter and John Grisham, and I'd read all these like fairy tale books that just kind of put me in this movie scene, but it wasn't doing anything to develop myself. So when I looked at that man and I realized that I'm going to have to start developing new habits, I'm going to have to think differently. I didn't really know where to start, but I knew in there was a lot of books. So I started on this journey of actually figuring out what are the reasons why I'm coming back. And for me, it was drug addiction. I was constantly going back to drugs. So I started this journey of recovery and started reading a book called the Alcoholics Anonymous book to try to learn more about, like, why do I do these things? Why am I going back to drugs? How do I stay sober? And that's when the journey for me started to say, I got to do something different.
So you addressed your addiction first, which was the root of what your incarceration was about.
Absolutely, yeah. And what's amazing, I still go into prisons today. I still talk to guys. I send them emails on their tablets, and I have relationships with them. And obviously, as a lot of people know, there's drugs in prison. Whether you want to say drugs, cigarettes, whatever it is, they're there. And the thing is, we don't realize. For me, there's a lot of addicts there. When I came into prison, I was a drug addict. So you throw me into prison. I don't, all of a sudden I'm sober for a little bit until I get into prison. I realize I can go back to doing what I was doing. There's a lot of people right now who are incarcerated that are not criminals. I'm not a criminal. I really still didn't think I was a criminal. I was a drug addict making criminal decisions because of my addiction. That's why I was stealing. Now, for the individuals who were selling drugs or doing things to maybe provide for their family or whatever justification it was the survival mode that we are taught. And there's always a root of, why do I do what I do? Why do I feel like this is the only way? And the truth is if you ended up in prison, you were making decisions, that the consequences were prison. The consequences were jail. And I think to sit down as I'm talking to these guys, and I'm going back into the prisons, is to sit down and realize that you don't know what you don't know. You think about a lot of guys who are incarcerated. I hear it a lot that I don't have another choice. I have a felony on my record and I don't have another choice. Well, as soon as you say that out loud, you're giving yourself permission to tell yourself there is not another choice. But the truth is there is another choice. You think about drug addicts or drug dealers, for example, and I'm only using these examples because it's my experience. We are entrepreneurs. I mean, if you look back at thinking about the ways I would have to go get drugs, or the ways I would have to find the drug dealer who would give me a total amount of drugs, and then I would have to break that down and diversify it and sell it to make a profit, that's an entrepreneur. And it's amazing. That's a gift.
You take that and put that into a business plan, right? I mean, because you're learning about money, you're learning about weights, you're doing math. I mean, that is exactly a business. So when you can take those skills and use them for something that is totally legal, that's another whole story. Hey, I've got a question before I forget it. Going back to the reading, did I read something about that you either read or talked about the book The Jungle by Upton Sinclair?
The Jungle wasn't for me. One of my books was actually Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was my transformation
Seven.
book.
Okay. I don't know why I had that in my mind, but I wanted to ask which the transformation book was because we usually have one when we start that journey and looking.
Yeah, Stephen Covey. It was called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. The guy who actually slept in the bunk next to me, I would always see him reading these like self-help books. And he would always try to talk to me, but my mind wasn't open to receiving it. And I asked him, I said, hey, do you have one of those books? And he handed me that book. The reason why that book changed my life was there was a chapter in the book that was called Begin with the End in Mind. And I was on this journey of trying to figure out, who I wanted to become, who I wanted to be, what was my purpose, what was going to be my purpose in life. And in this book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, the begin with the end in mind, what he talks about is he says, I want you to envision yourself walking into a church. And as you're walking into this church, I want you to envision that everybody's wearing black. And I remember till this day, after reading it, I closed my eyes and I did it. I took myself to that place. And I walked into this church and there was my family members there. There was friends. There was people that I've known, that I've worked with, that were all there. Everybody was wearing black. There was a casket in the front of the funeral in the church, and it's a funeral. And when you walk up to that casket, they envision it's you inside of that casket. This is your funeral. And what he talks about, and he goes in depth, but to kind of give a quick preview of what he says is, I want you to envision what you want people to say about you when you die. Your mother's going to speak about you, your father, whoever it is that your closest family members to you. What do you want them to say about you? And for the first time in my life, I sat down and I thought about that, and I thought about, what do I want people to say about me when I die? And what's amazing is I used to focus on who I didn't want to become. I knew I didn't want to be that guy, that same old guy that was nobody could trust, that was just always doing the same old things. When everybody thought of Joseph, they thought of the guy who was going to end up back in prison or rehab or dead. That was what I always believed of who I was. But I never thought about who I wanted to become. And that journey for me to sit down and write down, I start, of course, in prison, we have time. I sat down, I still have the folder in my drawer today. And I wrote down what I wanted my mother to say about me. If I get married, what do I want my wife? When I have children, or if you have children, you write down what you want them to say about you, my community. And what I found in the correlation of those things was I wanted everybody to say that Joseph brought value to my life, that Joseph was dependable, that anytime I needed anything, he was there. He was honest. He was hardworking. He was loving. And what's funny is I started thinking about those things. I was like, wow, I haven't been all these things. I've never, I wasn't somebody you could trust at the moment. And what's important as you're doing this, for anybody listening, is don't judge yourself for who you're not at this moment. Remember, you're on this journey of becoming who you want to be. So now I started focusing on that, even in prison. I started being somebody that said, if you asked me for something and I told you yes, I was going to do it. If you told me you needed help with something, I was going to help you. So I started to actually evolve into this person and focus on it. And even today, I'm focusing on it every day as I spend my time where I spend my time in business, or I spend my time with my family. I'm monitoring where I spend my time, and I always reflect at the end of my night. I do an inventory. Did I spend the time in these places that matter to me most? Because it's so easy to spend our time, especially in prison, hey, we go work out, we go do our things, we have conversations with people, we eat our food, and we kill the day. But where did we spend our time? Who are we becoming in this journey of time? And prison is actually a great time to start, because you have time. If you're going to develop these habits in prison, a lot of times people in prison, I hear this a lot. When I come home, I'm going to start. And I always tell them, I said, no. Don't, please. Because the problem with when you come home, you're going to start. Even today, there's distractions out there in the world. And it's a lot harder to start that habit out there than it is here. I had the best habits when I was in prison. The best. I look back at my habits and my rituals and my routine. It was very disciplined because I didn't have distractions. But if you start creating those habits now and you start saying, I want to be a guy who reads books, I want to be a guy who helps people, you need to start that now. So when you get out, you're just adding that to your life as you come home.
So you only had 4 months after you started this transformation. What happened when you walked out the door?
Well, what happened when I walked out the door was the fear. The fear was real. I was on probation in the state of Florida. This is my second time in prison. When I walked into my probation office, what she said to me the first meeting was, Joseph, somebody who's been to prison twice gets out on probation. 93% of them come back to prison. And a lot of people in prison are telling you, be careful, the system's rigged against you. There's these words and these people who believe that the reason why they're there is because of the system. And they pass their limiting beliefs and their victimhood onto you. And the problem is if you start believing that the system is rigged against you, you will see that it is. Whether it is or not, you will start to create it. So for me, when I got out, I remember thinking that I'm not going to allow myself to be a statistic. I just won't. I know this is going to be hard work. I'm still afraid of what I don't know, but I'm going to use this fear and I'm going to use this not knowing to reach out to people. I want to start creating a community. I want to get involved in my church. I want to get into recovery. I knew I had to do some things that were different, which is very uncomfortable for us. Anytime you do something different, it's uncomfortable. I knew that I was going to have a lot of people, when you're in prison, you're thinking about your old friends and you're thinking about reuniting and you're thinking about the girl that's been writing you and you want to get around people, right? You want to get around the real life people that are out there and start hanging out again. I did that when I first came home and that led me back to where I was. So when I came home, I knew I got to focus on me. I got to just focus on me. I don't have time to reunite with all the old friends, which led me back to here, and it's not that they were bad people. They were living their life. I couldn't put myself in that environment. So I knew coming home that this time it's got to be different. Now, the second thing that was important to me was when I came out the first time, I said the same thing. This time it's going to be different. I've never met anybody who got out of prison that said, I'm coming back. They always say there's no way I'm going to go back. And then what ends up happening, which is what happened to me, is a month goes by and you start getting comfortable. And for me, what happened was I forgot. I forgot about what it was like to be in prison. I forgot that it's possible for me to come back. I just picked up my 6-year sobriety chip yesterday. And I was sharing with the people in the program. And I said, what's amazing, and I started to get emotional. I know that there's a possibility I can go back to prison. I don't ever throw that out the window. I don't throw out the window that there's a possibility I can relapse again. And it's not that I'm living in this reality of, oh my gosh, I'm going back. It's the reality of if I don't realize that there's a possibility to go back, I will not be making the decisions I'm making today to make sure that I'm not going back. And I have to do that for myself because the first time I got out of prison, I told myself I'm never coming back. So I didn't, I had pride and I thought I was never coming back. But today I'm afraid of going back. I know I could go back to prison. I know I can go back to drugs. If I, as long as I do the things that I constantly do today, which is working my program, keeping my community around, keeping my spirituality, staying focused on the things that will not lead. I've had friends that I've worked out in the gym and they smoke weed and they were like, hey, I'll give you a ride. And I said, I'm not hopping in your car. And they're like, bro, it's okay. And I look at them. I said, I don't care what you think about me. I don't care how you feel. I know that there's a possibility if I hop in this vehicle and you're smoking weed that I can go back to prison. And if you don't like that, that's fine, man. I really don't care about your opinion as harsh as that may sound. But I have to be that way or I'll go back.
See, and that's the smart thing to do, Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you something. Did you have a hard time staying home? Like, did you feel like you had to be doing something all the time? Like you missed out? Because I see a lot of guys that just run themselves ragged because they feel, especially the ones that went in really young and did a long bid, that, you have that feeling that I got to make up for that lost time.
So I did that when I first went to prison. My first prison sentence and I came home, it was exactly that. I felt like I lost time. So I went back to trying to make up for time that I lost. The problem with that is you never can make it up. You're just trying to create a new life and a new version. And that was the Joseph who didn't have the end in mind. It's why the end in mind was so important to me, because when I came home this time, I wasn't thinking about the lost time. I was just realizing like, this is the time I got now. I'm 26 years old. If I want to create the life that I want, it's got to start now. I can't get back the old time. I got to start new. I got to start fresh. So, the few things that I wanted to do, as silly as it sounded when I came home, I tried to keep it really simple. It wasn't so much about being out with a bunch of people. Like I couldn't wait to go to the grocery store and just buy some food that I'd like, go buy something that I want, take it home and just sit down on the couch and relax. What I think is important for guys who are incarcerated right now is to simplify what they want to do when they come home. And if you're going to be telling yourself right now, as you're in prison and you know you're coming home, that I missed out on so much, man, I can't wait to get back to my old friends. You're trying to recreate the old life that you had, and that's what got you back here. As for me, I just really wanted to live a simple life. I kept thinking about, I don't want to go back to the old friends, because I know if I do, now I was, unfortunately, I learned the hard way. I had to go to prison the first time to experience what I experienced, and then going back the second time to realize, like, if I do what I did last time, I'm going to come back. So it was honestly like a curse and a gift.
Well, according to the program, that's one of the things they say all the time is to keep it simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
The less complications you have, the less apt you are to get tripped up.
of course. And it honestly, for me at least, it goes back to the fear. Like it's so funny. I say this to my wife all the time. I'm always talking about what it was like when I was in prison, and I do it on purpose because I want it to remind me. Like, I don't want to forget. And then I know it's possible. I like my mother and father, they don't understand addiction, and they don't ask me as much anymore, but they used to ask me before, like, are you afraid, of going back? Are you afraid? I said, absolutely, I'm afraid. I'm scared. I'm so scared of that. But it's why I make the decisions I make today, because of that fear. If I'm not afraid of going back, I'm not aware that it is possible that I can go back to prison. It's possible.
That's a healthy fear to have, though, when you think about it. The ones that think they've got it. Oh, I got this. No, I don't need any help.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. Something, you had some promo papers that came to me before I had called about doing the interview, and something stood right out to me as I was reading it, and I said, he's the one I want. And it said that you had talked about that what you wanted to do was give hope and inspiration to anyone who feels like they have their own demons to fight and can't find hope anywhere in their lives. How do people find that hope and restore that hope within themselves?
So the first thing was, it always goes back to the root, and it goes back to the reflection. This is why I was so grateful that I'm an addict. Like, I say this all the time, because in the program of recovery, what happens is, especially being incarcerated, is we're sitting in our guilt, we're sitting in our shame, we're sitting in our emotions, and we don't know what to do with them. And now, as you're incarcerated, a lot of times you're not the only one who's incarcerated. You've taken your family with you, and it's tough. It's not easy. The problem, what happened for me when I was incarcerated, is it's not like you can talk to people while you're incarcerated about that stuff, because in prison you can't show any sign of weakness, and what happens is, a lot of the stuff for me, I was always trying to prove that I was good enough. I was always trying to prove that I had something to give, but I'm here right now in my life incarcerated, and I have nothing to give. But the hope that I had was, my life is not over. I'm here right now. It's wild, the thoughts that come into our mind. And I wish we had tablets when I was incarcerated, but like, I talk to these guys now, and I'm like, you have an avenue now where you can be pouring positivity into your mind, because the mind is a scary place, but it could be a great place. And to find hope is to realize that, hey, look, if you're alive today, incarcerated in prison, you're alive. I have a friend right now who just got in a car accident, and they're paralyzed, and may not make it. We don't know if they're going to make it today. And what's wild, and what I think about, is if that person could have a moment in one day in their life, would they take it in prison? And they'd probably tell you, throw me in a prison right now so I can just walk. I don't care where I am. I just want to walk. It's a perspective change. So for me, finding that hope, number one, I don't know how to do it without a higher power, because for me, I'm a very spiritual person. And when I don't have hope, I got to turn to something that can give me hope. I don't know what your higher power may be, or who it is, but I believe, left to my own device, we all have this, I always call it a God-filled hole in our heart, and I always say, if you just reach out, that hole can be filled. The problem is we just tend not to reach out. So for me, my hope comes from that. My hope comes from that. I remember thinking when I was right when I got out of that 10 by 10 cell, and I would get on my knees and I'd pray and I say, God, look, I don't know if you're real, and I don't know. And if you are, I don't believe I was created to live a life like this. I don't believe I was created to just die in prison or die by drugs. I believe I was created for something more. And what's wild is, as I was saying those things out loud, I don't even know if I believed it, but I was almost like saying it out loud because I wanted to choose to believe it. It's amazing when you say things out loud or you start to write down these positive things. It's all this stuff is in your unconscious. What happens is it turns into your subconscious. There's a thing in your brain. It's called the RAS system, the reticular activating system. If you buy like a Jeep, for example, you buy a white Jeep. It's funny, start noticing white Jeeps on the road.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. You start noticing it. You start, oh, there's a Jeep. There's a Jeep. And it's not because the Jeep started showing up, as you actually have one and now you're paying attention to it. And that's called the reticular activating system in your brain. So I always tell people, whether you believe it or not, you start saying it out loud. I don't believe I was created for this. I believe I was created for XYZ. I believe I was created to provide value to people. I believe I was created to give hope to somebody. I remember thinking about how much nobody in my life when I got arrested, there wasn't one person you would have ever met that said Joseph did something good for me, ever. And if I did, I ended up hurting them, and that's why I did it. I did something good for them to get something out of it. And I remember just thinking that is not a valuable life. If I were to die and nobody would show up at my funeral, nobody cared, that I don't believe that was going to be my story. I just didn't believe it. I chose at that moment to not believe it. And that gave me hope. It gave me hope to say, okay, this is the end of my story. I talk to guys who are serving life sentences in prison, and I tell them, this is not the end of your story. Do you know you can transform one man in here, one man in prison, by helping him, by giving him hope, by giving him light, by lifting him up. And then all of a sudden that man has a positive spirit and a positive energy because you helped him. And guess what he does with that energy? He takes that to his family on the phone, or he takes that to his children. And now that seed could obviously spread into a bunch of trees that you never get to see grow. And when you can start living like that, it gives you hope. Who can I touch today, God? Who can I impact? Who can I help? Who can I plant a seed? Because now I have a purpose. Now I have something to give. And that's just where I believe people find hope, is by choosing to believe that there is hope. There's hope for every human.
That's really beautiful. And to play off from that, you are doing something now because you have a podcast, correct?
That's right.
Let's Get Real?
It's called Let's Get Real. We're currently working on getting it approved to come into Florida. I talk a lot about what it was like while I was in prison. So there's a lot of editing that I have to do to get it approved, because the prison system doesn't want me talking about, obviously, certain things and stuff.
Right.
So we're working on getting that into prisons now.
That's wonderful. I really think that the whole thing about tablets inside was one of the best things that has come along. It opens up opportunities for communication with families. It has, with the text messaging, and the education opportunities are just amazing from that.
Yeah, and isn't that a blessing? It's what's amazing. I was talking to these guys the other day, and they were on lockdown, and then they got off of lockdown. They were on lockdown for 5 days, and some of them were complaining, "Oh, this sucks." And I said, and then one guy said, "Man, when they finally let us out, and I got to the rec yard, it was so great. It was amazing." And I said to them, do you see the power of positivity and perspective? You could feel joy and look at the light of anything. Now, if the bad thing wouldn't have happened to the lockdown, when you went to that rec yard, you wouldn't have realized how beautiful the rec yard is. You wouldn't have realized how great it was to just get out there. And sometimes in life, sometimes it has to get dark to appreciate the light. And I'm telling you, it really is. I remember moments in prison that I had the most joy. No matter the fact that I was incarcerated or not, I just had joy because I was looking at the light. I was looking at the light, and I was like, you know what? And I started to think about the positivity, and that's what really just started to give me hope. It's all about our perspective, and today I love the light because I lived in the dark.
We tend to look so much to what we don't have. If I had this, I would be happy. If I lived there, I would be happy. But happiness is within. And until
Absolutely.
we can find that within ourselves, we're not going to be happy.
And to add to that, there's a I heard this from a psychotherapist on a series on Netflix, and he talked about they created this thing called the perfect snapshot. That everybody has the perfect snapshot, which is their goal or where they are, where they're going to get. For somebody in prison, it's the release date, right? And the perfect snapshot, we can't wait to get there. Now the problem with the perfect snapshot is we think when we get there we'll be happy, we'll have bliss, but there's three things in life that nobody can avoid. And the three things are: you can't avoid pain. So no matter when you get to that perfect snapshot, there will be pain. Eventually, there's just things we deal with in life that we can't avoid, that there's pain. It's not constant pain. Maybe there's less, but there still will be pain. There will be uncertainty. We're always going to have uncertainty in our life or what the next day entails or when a problem happens in our life. And there's constant work. And for example, like in my business, I always said, I can't wait till I get to this place where my business operates itself. It's going to be great, because I'm not going to have to worry about waking up so early and going out there and putting up fences. But maybe I don't have financial problems, or maybe I don't have those problems of wear and tear on my body. But today I still have different problems. And that's where people start to fall short, as they think when I get to this place, it'll be great. And then they get there and there's still problems and they wonder why they're not happy. Because they thought when I get there, it's going to be blissful and perfect. And then problems happen. They're like, oh my gosh, I never prepared for this.
It's all about the ride, getting there. Hey,
Uh-huh.
I want you to talk about Top Fence because so many people out there say, I'm never going to make it. And from what I hear, your fencing business has been quite successful. So I
Mhm.
want you to make sure to talk a little of that.
Of course. And to touch on that topic more of my business, what happened for me is, I was such on this journey that I didn't want to be a statistic. I just didn't. And I kept hearing people say, or it's going to be so hard to do this with a felony on your record, right? You have a felony. It's going to be so hard. It's going to be so hard. And I hated that. I hated that people brought this idea that it's hard. And it made it seem like it was impossible. And this is what I say. And I'm saying this because it's how I became a business owner. I never wanted my felony to stop me from achieving greatness, from achieving success. I just didn't believe that just because I had a felony on my record, I couldn't be successful. Now, will there be harder times? Yes. Like sometimes I go rent a house and they ask me that question, and I understand it. And what I tell people is, hey, maybe you have to do more. Like don't just stop at the fact that this job would not hire you because you had a felony on your record. Instead of filling out the application, maybe go to the office and stop in and say, hey, sir, I just want to chat with you for a moment. And every time I've done this, it's worked. Every single time for me personally, I've done it, it worked. I know you guys asked about this felony, and here it is. I'd like to tell you my situation, where I'm at, and what I could provide for you guys. And I understand if it stops you from hiring me at the time, but this is who I am. You do have to do more. Maybe the average guy who doesn't have a felony doesn't have to do that. He gets called right away. But again, if you want it, it can happen. So for me and my business, I always believe that I can accomplish more. And the other part, for going back to the beginning with the end in mind, I wanted to provide value to people. I wanted to show people it was possible. And what that meant was I had to be the example. I wanted to give people example. And the reason why I did was there was guys that I would listen to on podcasts or stories or books that I read that got out of prison and they made it. And they were the example for me. And I felt like I want to do the same for other people. I want to be the example for other people who get out of prison or who are dealing with drug addiction and they feel like there's no hope. I want to be that hope. And that gave me value. That allowed me to not only do it for me. I'm not even accomplishing, or I'm not on this podcast to promote a book because I don't have a book. I'm not on here to promote a coaching program because I don't. I'm on here to provide hope. I'm on here to provide hope to people. So when I started the journey of my business, as wild as it sounds, I didn't feel like I was doing it for me. I felt like I was doing it for my story. I felt like I was doing it to show God's glory. I have a shirt, and it's a quote that I say all the time, that if you hide your story, you hide God's glory. And I felt like if I could just continue on this journey and I could accomplish some stuff, I could show people what's possible. Because other guys were doing it. I saw other guys who had felonies that were doing trucking businesses. They had barber shops. And I'm like, if these guys can do it and provide hope, I want to be somebody that does that. So that really provided inspiration for those days that I wanted to quit in my business. And I say this and it's so true. I would think about the guys getting out of prison. What would I tell them? I would tell them I quit, or I tell them, hey, I've been there, brother. I know what it's like to feel like this is tough, but this is what I did to get out of it. So for me, it provided me that opportunity to give people hope. And another thing for me was I actually enjoy it. I loved the idea of creating something and building it and then giving people opportunities to work. It really just provided value to other people. It goes back to me focusing on begin with the end in mind. It's so wild. And I was talking to a guy now starting a business, and I know not everybody's like this, but this is just my story. When I created my business, I didn't really think about the wealth. It's so crazy, but I just didn't. Like, I knew it provided me money, but what really drove me was providing opportunities for other people, was being an inspiration and a story for other people, was showing people that if I could do it, you can do it too. And that really motivated me. And then the money followed. If I was focused on the money, I don't believe I would have achieved what I've done now, because then when I hired somebody, I would think, oh, I can't pay him that well because I'll make less money. My goal was always to provide value. And honestly, my business has done that. And this is our 5th year in business. We'll do about we ended last year doing $4.5 million in sales last year. We've generated over $12.5 million in revenue in the past 4 years. And we're growing, and it's exciting. I'm providing a job for my brother. My wife is not working with us. She loves it. My shop guy was just in here, and he told me, just yesterday, he said, I want to retire here. This is the last job I ever want to have. And that goes back to, it's amazing. The begin with the end in mind. I keep going back to that, but it goes back to, I started it that way. I wanted it to become this. And it's just amazing to see that, God has given me the opportunity to do this today.